Anyway.
Can I share some thoughts?
Yes, please, brother.
So I'm sitting here and I'm thinking about this kind of question that was explicitly and implicitly touched on, like which comes first, the political grounding or politics. And I'm trying to get away from that binary and get at what I thought Freedom School did a wonderful job of recognizing that we're inherently political beings. Our children are political beings. The community is a political beings. Are political beings, and whether the project of white supremacy ever got off the ground, this goes back to memory. There's an engagement that has to take place with regard to what type of political beings are we going to become. And that starting point isn't not being white.
Right.
That starting point isn't not being American. That starting point is not to not be a part of the government. It's something that predates that. And even if it didn't predate that, as political beings, part of the challenge of being human is to make a conscious decision about who you individually and collectively want to be in the future, and who you want those who follow you to be and to become. And I thought Freedom Schools inherently recognized that we were all political beings. The other thing that I'll connect to that is, as political beings, we create political institutions. Some of those are electoral or representative. And so politics, the way that we've been using it, is an expression of the makeup of the political beings that we currently are comprising. Sometimes that expression leads to democratic institutions, other types of institutions, but both are constantly creating each other back and forth. So the political beings, the community itself, how that's constituted will create certain political institutions. But it also works in the other way. The political institutions absolutely will shape how people think of themselves. And so we have to attack both at the same time. The Supreme Court has done an excellent job of disrupting our disruptions.
That's right. That's exactly right.
Political economic elites have done a phenomenal job of doing the same thing. And so they're constantly reimagining white people and then pulling them to something that's harmful to us, harmful to themselves, harmful to the planet. And they're doing the same with black folks as well. And so just recognizing that we have to have institutions, which Freedom Schools absolutely was. The Black Church has served that role. Other religious organizations, non-religious organizations. We have to have political institutions that's constantly creating the type of political beings that we want. And then we have to think seriously about what is our strategy to obtain political power as is expressed through government. Because I agree with you, there is no alternative to government. And that's a thing that too often we fail to recognize on questions related to, are people going to have water to drink that doesn't have poison in it?
Right.
You need a government to handle that. On questions related to climate destruction, which is hitting us first and the most severely, you need governments to tackle that problem because the scale goes way beyond community, it goes way beyond nations.
But that also posits that the government isn't trying to poison you and trying to, it's the thing about governments, and getting involved in that, it's not like it's happenstance that we're being poisoned. It's not that it's happenstance that we're the ones that are being targeted for the worst outcomes on the planet. And I feel like the people that are in power now have no desire to give it up, even though their power is actually hurting them now. Like it's getting to the point where the people who've always had power are and have gained it through these really corrosive, destructive ways. Now their destruction is actually impacting them in a bad way, but they still won't give it up. And it's like people in power don't see that power. And it's kind of like, I just kind of sit around and think about, we talk about the different freedom fighters and different people And it's like there's so many of the people from like Ferguson and like these recent freedom fighters that are dead now. Like the brother who picked up the smoke can and threw it back at the cops because he was trying to get away from it. Dead. Like there's so many people who have been dead. There's a brother who was arrested and like kind of disappeared for a while because he was involved with the Black Lives Matter movement. So what government is going to do is it's going to protect itself, even as it eats itself, it protects itself. So whether we want to get into like we're going to get in and make a change a lot. That's what happens when you have the DOJ talking about, well, now we're going to go after these black radical extremists, like identity extremists, except, and at the same time, white terrorists are running around shooting up shit. And you're going, like, so that's what I mean by, it's like, you want to like move towards towards the mainstream, and you want to like take over. They're not like it's like you have to. I'm just saying it just needs to be something that's more contained and smaller as opposed to bigger. Because when you let them know that you have a plan to try to get around it, they will figure out a way to not.
I'll say something real quick before I think I want to say something.
Okay.
I'll still take a little bit, but I think in the current political climate, if my skepticism of government before has turned into like total and complete disillusionment that government in and of itself is worth anything. And my total interest in power and what it is right now is trying to find a way to cultivate power among Black communities and people of color that is something that can't be revoked or reversed or taken away or shifted after somebody else becomes president or after somebody decides this policy is trash and throws it away. Like everything that I've seen happen in this last year and a half, like people's families being torn apart, voting rights bill being gutted and trashed, and all these other things. Like I'm at a point now where I am completely and totally disillusioned with any ideas or hope about trying to get power through something that doesn't come from myself or from people I can directly connect to. Mm-hmm. So to me, government, I understand that I live in a political system where I cannot function absent it. But my purpose of regarding it with any kind of intentionality now is for it to function as an umbrella for anything that I try to do as I'm trying to build with the people who I'm looking at. So Freedom School to me is the place where I exercise my power to affect change around me in my communities. That's how I get things done. That's how I make things happen. That's how I intend to build something that people can't take away from me if I intentionally make it strong enough. However we do that, it has to be in a space that is independent enough where somebody can't just come in and step on me whenever they want to or say, oh, what is this? We don't like it. Let's try and take it away. It's like, no, we did this. You don't have anything to do with this. We built it. It's ours. If you got a problem with it, you got a problem with all of us. This is our stuff.
So I think that's really important, and we don't have enough time. I certainly don't have enough time or expertise to just get at everything that you communicated. But I think we have to be clear on what government is versus who controls government, because the government, I would argue, isn't largely controlled by people. For the vast majority of people, I would say the vast majority of people do want us to have clean water. The vast majority of people do want clean air. But if you have a government that's controlled by corporations, right, then you're going to see the government being used for radically different purpose. And the elites are very much clearer in their power analysis. So they say, not that government is bad. They say, how do we break government so that people disengage from thinking about government? And then we'll control government. So you have corporations, they have 100 tax lawyers. They have lobbyists out the wazoo. They're not sitting back going, government's pointless. They're saying, let's break it in a certain way so that people will disengage. They do the same thing with public housing. Something that's actually probably needed if you're going to be serious about making sure everyone has housing. But they broke it. They defunded it, they stigmatized it, and now people say we don't want public housing. Okay, so now where are you getting your housing from? Wells Fargo? How's that working out for you? And they do the same thing, education, public school system. They break the public school system, they don't get out the education game, they then redirect you to something else. So I understand why one would say government isn't working for us or certain institutions isn't working for us. But even if that history didn't exist, we would still be a collective body that's trying to figure out how do we feed, clean, clothe, house, and take care of one another. And that project inevitably leads to creating government structures of some type. But it's both, because there are going to be certain things that, okay, you might not have an opportunity to control the federal government, and you take that into account, and you figure out what can you deal with locally. But I do think we should be clear on just making sure we understand that how something is currently functioning is a different question from how we need it to function. And then the last thing that I'll just say is, again, we're not trying to merely replace the people who currently are in power. So the goal isn't just to have control or control and be independent. Because to me, that sounds a lot like whiteness, right? This idea that's like, oh, if we just have control and we can dominate ourselves, then everything's going to magically work out. And oftentimes that doesn't take place because people can be corrupted or just use power differently. So how do we actually create institutions that do the thing that we believe we would have been doing had white supremacy and the transatlantic slave trade never showed up?
Right.
And that's try to figure out how to serve humanity. How do we have a government system that is serving humanity? How do we have an educational system that's serving humanity? And we pose that question to people and say, we can answer that question better than you. Freedom School is in a position to say, we can answer the question of what type of education your child is supposed to receive better than the other models.
That's very true.
We can answer the question of why we are here better than the other institutions.
What would it take to be able to articulate